In the aftermath of October 1917, the world witnessed the rise of a new radical left force, one that promised liberation. But instead of liberation, they established a dictatorship, continued the old imperial policy of colonialism and plunged the Russian economy into chaos. Unable to ensure prosperity for the peoples of Soviet Russia, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, nevertheless did not see their revolution as limited to Russia. They envisioned something far wider and far more dangerous. The Bolsheviks believed their victory in seizing power was only the beginning. Their mission was a global uprising. In 1919, they founded the Communist International, an organization designed to coordinate revolutions worldwide. Behind its rhetoric of worker solidarity lay a mechanism for influence, destabilization, and political interference in sovereign states. Their ambitions soon turned into action. In 1920, Soviet forces marched west during the Polish-Soviet War. This was not merely a territorial conflict. It was an attempt to carry the revolution into Europe. The goal was to ignite the flames of revolution in Germany. But the plan failed. Polish resistance shattered the advance, halting what could have been a far wider conflict. Poland saved Europe from the horrors of the Cheka. Despite military setbacks, the Soviet leadership did not abandon its strategy. Through the Communist International, communist movements across Europe were encouraged, including funding. This led to strikes, uprisings, and riots. But it had the opposite effect. Rather than triggering revolutions, these actions often strengthened right-wing forces. Fear of communism grew, and governments intensified repression against pro-communist activities. Initially, the Bolsheviks viewed Pan-Islamism and Pan-Turkism as allies in the fight against Western imperialists. In the 1920s, in Russian Turkestan, national resistance to Bolshevik policies was widespread. Most notable was the Basmachi movement, which sought to create an independent Turkic state, Great Turkestan. Among its leaders was Enver Pasha, the former Ottoman general and Pan-Turkist who sought to unify a resistance against Soviet rule and who transformed their disparate forces into a well-trained army. His command structure was modeled on the German one, and his staff included several experienced Turkish officers. For a time, Soviet authority in the region was at risk of collapse. By early 1922, the Basmachi had captured many cities in southern Russian Turkestan, including Samarkand and Dushanbe. The flirtation with Pan-Turkism, which began as an anti-European maneuvering, escalated into a brutal regional conflict, forcing the Bolsheviks to abandon alliance with the Pan-Turkist movement and reassert control by force. By 1926, armed resistance by the Basmachi to Soviet rule had died down in most areas of Russian Turkestan. However, skirmishes and occasional battles along the border with Afghanistan continued until the early 1930s. In the 1920s, the Soviet Union and the Communist International turned their attention to the Kuomintang, commonly known as the Chinese Nationalist Party, the major political party in the Republic of China, as a revolutionary partner. Money, training, and advisors flowed in. But in 1926 and 1927, everything changed. Chiang Kai-shek, who led the nationalist government of the Republic of China, turned on his communist allies. He initiated an anti-communist campaign of political repression known as the White Terror, which began with the Shanghai Massacre in April 1927 and continued into the early 1930s. The fragile alliance collapsed, revealing the hostility to communist ideology among non-left political groups abroad. By the mid-1920s, the Soviet Union began emerging from diplomatic isolation. Countries with left-wing governments, such as the United Kingdom and France in 1924, recognized the Soviet Union and established diplomatic relations with it. They were followed by fascist Italy. However, behind the scenes, alertness and suspicion remained. When the Communist International's involvement in foreign political movements became undeniable, as in its support for the 1926 British general strike, relations with the Soviet Union deteriorated rapidly. In May 1927, diplomatic relations between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union were severed after British Conservative Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin presented decrypted Soviet telegrams to the House of Commons, which proved Soviet espionage activities. The aftermath of this incident contributed to the Soviet war scare of 1927, as it heightened internal Soviet fears of invasion. Although historians generally believe this fear was created by Stalin to use against his opponents in the left opposition. The Soviet Union's economy was weak. The Red Army had a low level of weapons supply. To strengthen the Red Army and develop the military industry, the Soviet Union required a radical modification of the entire economy in a country with a dominant peasant population. What had begun as a revolutionary experiment was becoming a system driven by control, suspicion, and war preparedness. A movement that promised global liberation instead fueled destabilization, both abroad and at home.